Hello, my name is Blossoms and welcome to another Genshin Impact video. And following Albedo, we're doing another Geo character, this one Noelle, as she's going to be another fantastic Geo character that you're going to be able to pair with characters like Goro and Arataki Ito that are right around the corner. And she also benefits from the brand new set that has been enhancing some of our Geo characters and is still a fantastic and very approachable character that everybody has and has always been one of my favorites. So today we're going to go over a brand new build with the brand new set, checking it out, what you may or may not want to use, as showing off some different weapon choices, as well as going over different team comps, followed by a showcase. So we've got a lot to cover, but without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the build. Before we get into the actual build, we need to know a little bit about Noelle's kit and exactly how she works. And Noelle is a character that has always been a jack of all trades, master of none, in the sense that she can tank, DPS, and heal, and she's not fantastic at any of those, but she is solid at all of those, and that has always been one of her greatest strengths, and one of the reasons that she's a really good free-to-play character to have. I'm glad everybody does get her just because she can kind of do everything, and that is very nice. So how does she work? Well, her normal attacks don't really matter too much. You are going to need to level them up because her elemental burst does scale off of them, but they don't do anything special. Her E-skill, however, you cast it and it casts a Geo Shield around you. This Geo Shield scales off of her defense, and when she normal and charge attacks, she has a chance to regenerate HP for all of your characters. And this has the damage absorption of other Geo Shields and whatnot, where it's just a pretty beefy shield. And this is a pretty rock solid shield. You're going to be wanting to build Noelle for defense pretty hardcore, and her healing not only scales off the defense, but the damage absorption of the shield does, and it can become pretty tanky. It's not as tanky as somebody like Zhongni's, but it's definitely up there on the tanky tier list for shields. Now, I also want you to note that it does say the skill damage is 204% defense. That is just the initial cast. If anybody's nearby, it'll deal some damage. It doesn't really deal any damage itself. It also doesn't generate any particles, which is a huge problem. Noelle has a big energy problem, and that's one of her biggest weaknesses. But you can mitigate that with some other things that we'll talk about here in the future. But yeah, it has a duration of 12 seconds, a cooldown of 24 seconds, and you can make that a little bit lesser with one of her passives, but for the most part, it is a relatively long cooldown. All right, and as for her elemental burst sweeping time, the way it works is you cast it, you do a few sweeping swipes of Geo damage, and then from that point on, her attacks now have a huge sweeping AoE, and all of her damage is converted to Geo. And she also gains attack based off of her defense, and this attack increase is pretty huge. At level 10 here, you can see I'm getting 72% of our defense as attack, and that gets even crazier if you have one of our constellations, and we'll talk about that later as well. And as you notice here, the elemental burst and skill damage here numbers are basically just when you cast it, those initial damage numbers. This has nothing to do during the elemental burst when you're actually swinging her sword. All of that is going to be scaling off of your normal attacks. So a lot of you who may have been using Noelle and you're not dealing that much damage and you don't know why, it might just be because you haven't leveled up your normal attacks, because this does scale off your normal attacks. It has a duration of 15 seconds and a cooldown of 15 seconds, which means theoretically you could keep it at 100% uptime, and it has an energy cost of 60, which isn't that bad, but as we mentioned before, Noelle does have some pretty hefty energy issues. As for some of these passives, she does have this really good passive. It's very good for like Hu Tao and stuff. Basically, whenever a character in your party falls below 30%, you just get a free shield, and that's awesome. It's basically a get out of jail free card. If you get hit and you're low and you don't have time to heal or something, then you're just going to get a free shield, and that's very nice. She also has this other passive that helps her cooldown on her skill a little bit. Just every 4 normal attacks or charge attacks is going to reduce the cooldown of breastplate, which is pretty good, but not really that amazing. It will help you out during your elemental burst because you'll be able to get her shield much quicker, and then when she's off the field, you'll still have that shield, which is pretty nice, but overall nothing too crazy. All right, so here we're going to talk about artifacts, weapons, and then we'll get into constellations. Constellations aren't really going to change your build too much or anything, but they are worth going over, so we will be going over them. But for the actual artifact set, of course, the 4-piece of Husk of Opulent Dreams is what we're going to be using today. This is the brand new set, and it does work very, very well with Noelle. It's our only set that's ever given us some defense stats on the passive there, and then you get an additional Geo damage and defense increase on the 4-piece, and a lot of the time Noelle isn't really going to be on the field you're going to be doing stuff with your other party members, and then when you have her elemental burst or you need to heal, you're going to, you know, use her at that point, and she'll be getting this full bonus because she won't be on the field that much. And then when she is on the field, oftentimes you're going to have her elemental burst and dealing geo damage, so you're not going to be losing this bonus, which is actually very nice. So this set does work very well with her. It's free defense, so you definitely can't really complain there. And as for set alternatives, though, you can definitely go things like a 2-piece Archaic Petra and like a 2-piece Husk of Opulent Dreams. Those are fine. You can also, you know, do like a 2-piece this and like a 2-piece Retracing Bolide or a 4-piece Retracing Bolide. However, do note the 2-piece bonus on Retracing Bolide only applies to Noelle. If you cast her shield and then you swap to another character, you're not going to be getting that shield strength increase, so that is worth noting. But it is still a very powerful set on her because the increased 40% normal and charge attack damage does scale with their elemental burst, as we talked about before. So this is a pretty good set, and if you have a good set of this already, then that's going to be a pretty good option for you. But the 4-piece Husk of Opulent Dreams is just a very easy set, especially for her stats on her, and I you know, really recommend it. As for the main stats, what we're going to be running here is going to be defense percent, geo damage bonus, and crit damage. And this is going to be kind of the most optimal thing that you're going to want to run. Of course, crit rate, crit damage is going to be the option here, whatever is going to get your best ratio for your subsets. I somehow have gotten a weird amount of crit rate on a lot of this, and that's why we're running it here. But I did want to note that you do have some main stat alternative choices. Namely, if you just really need the energy recharge, you could run an energy recharge sans, a defense goblet, and then, you know, do crit rate or crit damage here. That is an option. You're not going to be dealing nearly as much damage, but it will help some of your consistency. However, I think there are much better ways to help her consistency in the weapons category, and we'll go over that as well. As for the substats you're going to want to be looking for, things like crit rate and crit damage are of course going to be very important. Energy recharge is going to be very nice because we did mention that she does have energy recharge issues, and then defense percent is going to be a top priority as well. So those 4, crit rate, crit damage, energy recharge, and defense percent, are going to be the main categories you're going to be looking for your substats. All right, it's time for the weapons, and this is where things get interesting. Because of this new set, it's actually opened up quite a bit of the weapons on Noelle, at least in my opinion. In the past, I would have said White Blind is pretty much the only really good thing on Noelle. There are some 5 stars you can do, like Skyward Pride, Wolf's Gravestone, those are fine on Noelle, but you really needed to eke out some solid stats on your artifacts to be able to use them, and White Blind just kind of carried you for the defense percent, and then you could worry about everything else on your artifact, and that helped out a lot. So that's why I always kind of recommend White Blind. But with this new set, since you're getting so much free defense, you can actually start to move away from White Blind. However, you don't need to either. I've been messing around with Serpent Spine, White Blind, and Wolf's Gravestone, and all of them are pretty similar in damage. Of course, things like Wolf's Gravestone had some peaks where it was dealing a bit more damage, and then so did the Serpent Spine, but White Blind was keeping up with the best of them in a very realistic manner. And I have R3 White Blind here, so that definitely is affecting that, and I also have R3 Serpent Spine, but yeah, they were all very, very similar in damage. I did not mess around too much with the Blackcliff Slasher, but I don't think it's going to be that bad of an option either. Really, your weapon choice this time around can be relatively just whatever you need to round out your stats the best, and that's why I'm going to be using Serpent Spine for this, because I just need some of the crit rate, and that helps out my damage the most right now. And Serpent Spine is also just fantastic. It's free extra damage, and it's basically the same damage as Wolf's Gravestone in this case, just because I was messing around with both of them. They're both very similar, and Serpent Spine was very, very strong for this. It's free extra damage, and the damage you take increase isn't really that bad. But if you don't have either of those, White Blind is still going to be a phenomenal option for this set, and it is still really, really good. Now, I did also want to mention that we talked about how to mitigate some of that consistency for Noelle if you really wanted to. The best way to make your Noelle have 100% uptime on her Elemental Burst is going to be running Favonius Greatsword. Crit hits are going to generate some particles, and if you have this at a high refinement, it's going to be much easier. You get high energy recharge. This helps her out a ton, and if you want to run a main DPS Noelle that always has her Elemental Burst, this is probably going to be the move for you, but you are going to be hurting on some of your substats that other weapons could provide, and you're really going to need some good artifacts to make sure you're dealing the most damage while getting the most consistency. So this weapon does provide that challenge, but it also provides that consistency for her burst. But most of us are likely going to be using Noelle kind of as like a healer and shielder, and in that case, these other weapons are really going to be the better options for you. just because of the fact that you don't really need to have such hardcore stats on your artifacts to make sure she's doing well. You can just choose whichever one's going to be the best for you. Now, other things I did want to mention on Noelle, I know a lot of people wonder about Luxurious Sea Lord. Is this going to help her in her elemental burst? No, it is not. As we talked about previously, it doesn't count as elemental burst damage. So that is worth noting. The Luxurious Sea Lord here is not going to help you. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. Things like the Katsuragi Kiri Nagamasa, definitely not struggling on that, aren't going to help that much either because her skill damage does have that very small radius. So you need to hit the opponent to make sure you get this passive to proc, and if you don't, you're just out of luck, which is kind of unfortunate. And then if you just don't really have any of these options, Sacrificial Greatsword isn't going to be the worst thing, because then you can at least pocket your shield. You just really need to make sure you're close enough to get the damage on your E skill in order to pocket that second shield, so that is worth it. But you know, if I would only recommend this if you don't really have these other options available to you, even something like Favonia's Greatsword. This is something I'd recommend only if you don't have those. All right, I did mention we were going to talk about Constellations because they are very important on Noelle. This is a C6 Noelle, and she does get a lot better with her Constellations, especially her C1. Her C1 is without a doubt likely her most important, and that is because while Sweeping Time and her Elemental Burst are up, when they're both in effect, basically the breastplate goes from having a chance to heal your allies to just guaranteed healing your allies, and not to mention Sweeping Time is going to be increasing the AoE of those normal attacks, meaning you are basically going to be hitting all of your opponents and healing your whole team. This makes her a much more consistent healer and is very, very valuable for her. C2, however, really isn't that insane. It decreases the stamina consumption on her charge attacks and increases the damage of them a little bit, but it's really not that crazy. There, you can just kind of like spin to win with Noelle and heal your entire team and deal a lot of AoE damage, and that is very fun, but this definitely isn't necessary or, you know, breaking her character or anything. Or C3 increases the levels. C4 is actually very nice. Basically, when Breastplate's duration expires or when it's destroyed by damage, it will deal 400% of attack of geo damage to surrounding opponents. And you're like, attack percent? That kind of sucks. Why would I do that? But this does count for when you're in your elemental burst and gaining the attack bonus from your defense, and you get some huge attack bonus depending on, you know, your Constellation of Noelle and how high your defense is. So a lot of times you'll have like 3k attack, and you know, you get that 400% attack, you're gonna be popping off and dealing a lot of damage. I've had this hit as high as like 60k. I've seen some people hit like 90k, so this can do a lot of damage. Of course, it's hard to time and execute, but it is still very solid, and every now and then you're just gonna be getting some really good damage out of nowhere. Or C5 just increases your levels, and then C6 is by far one of the craziest constellations on Noelle. Sweeping Time increases Noelle's attack by an additional 50% of her defense. So you were just getting like the 70% or so from the level 10 elemental burst there from before, and now you're getting a 50% extra on top of that, which is absolutely insane. It drives her attack through the roof and makes her super strong. This is when Noelle really starts dealing damage. Before this, Noelle doesn't really deal too much damage, but once you get the C6, that is when you can start really running her for dealing some damage. But also, additionally, every opponent you defeat during the skill's duration, it adds some you know, additional time to your elemental burst, which is very nice as well. Just a nice little quality of life. So yeah, as I said, none of these really change your build. You're still just going to be shoving everything into defense and rounding out your stats as best as possible with the brand new set, but all of these do make Noelle a much better character. All right, and before we get into the actual team comps, I will go over the stats of my Noelle. I only have 1,000 attack and 1,700 defense, and we have her at level 80. And I will say getting her to 90 is definitely very good as well, because she does have high scaling based defense. So the more levels you give her, the more defense she's going to get. Just ascending her here would drive my defense up pretty high. I believe we can check that. No, we can't, but it does drive your defense. You see we get 43 extra base defense there. That would probably bring me to the 1,900, almost 2,000 range, I'm sure. So you can see that just leveling her up will put her defense up quite considerably. As for the stats, I have 59.7% crit rate, 167.4 crit damage there, 121 energy recharge. I would definitely like that to be higher, but that's just going to come with luck on the artifacts. And then 46.6% geo damage. And as for the talents, if you didn't notice before, we have them at 8, 9, and 10. Of course, the priority for these is going to mostly be your normal attack and your elemental burst if you're trying to deal some good damage, but the breastplate is also extremely valuable just because it's going to provide you a bulkier shield, and that's going to be important for her kit as well in keeping your team protected, as well as she can only heal when breastplate is active, so you're gonna want it to be stronger because you don't want to cast it and then it get eradicated and you not be able to heal your team. As for team comps with Noelle, of course she's going to pair well with any Geo character here. Zhongli, maybe not so much just because he's more of like a shielder and petrify, and he doesn't really generate that much consistent energy. Ningguang is very good for energy generation and providing some additional damage. Albedo also provides some pretty decent energy, and as you saw in our previous build video, does some really good damage nowadays. So both of these are going to be good options, and the elemental resonance of Geo is just so good. If you're running a Geo character, I would try to fit in a second one. It's really worth it, especially with Goro coming. Goro is going to pair fantastically with Noelle, giving that extra defense as well as providing some extra Geo AoE, and she'll also pair pretty well with Arataki Ito. However, I do think they are going to be competing for some artifacts and weapons, especially if you don't have the brand new weapon for Arataki Ito. He might be wanting some of her claymores or artifacts, so that might be a tough fit for your party, I will say that, but she is going to pair well with both of them, and if you are trying to build some of those fuller Geo teams, she's going to fit in very nicely as a healer. Of course, for some of her best pairings, I did mention that Hu Tao is great with Noelle, just because of the fact that Hu Tao, of course, decreases her own health in order to, pop off with their damage. And if you go below 30% at Hu Tao, which you're going to want to be doing a lot to be dealing the most damage, you do get that free shield from Noelle's passive that I mentioned before, and that is actually fantastic. They are a very good pairing, and not to mention a double Geo comp along with Xingqiu and Hu Tao is one of the higher damage teams. I run in Spiral Abyss all the time. It is very reliable, and Noelle can definitely help out that team a bunch. In our previous video, I mentioned that Anemo characters kind of pair nicely with Albedo, just because he can group them up, and that is relatively true for Noelle, just because she does have that huge AoE, that huge sweeping AoE during her elemental burst, so it is kind of nice to group up characters, but the lack of interaction between Anemo and Geo really does suck, so I don't recommend them as they don't really enhance each other all that much, and not to mention that the sweep on Noelle's burst is so big, you don't even really need to have them grouped up to make sure you're hitting multiple opponents. One of the nicest thing about Noelle is also the fact that she is the all-rounder. She is the tank healer and can deal some rock solid damage, so she does pair very well with most teams and characters, but you are going to want to be accentuating her with maybe some good energy recharge characters like the Electro MC or the Raiden Shogun. Even a double Electro comp is very nice with Noelle, and then you could have like a Hydro character in there, or if you want to do Overload or something, but you're getting those energy particles, which is very valuable for Noelle because she does have that energy recharge issues, and if you aren't running something like Favonius Claymore, having a good character to be able to recharge her batteries whenever you need to is very good. And since Noelle is kind of a jack of all trades, the only characters that she doesn't really pair with are going to be one other healers and two maybe other shielders, as she just kind of covers all of their jobs. However, Noelle does have a little bit of consistency issues because you can't always be healing, so if you are in like a corrosion mechanic or something, you might be wanting to throw on another healer, or even like a pseudo healer like Xingqiu or something, just to supplement her healing in case she's not doing quite enough. Alright, so in typical build video fashion, we are of course going to destroy the Pyro Regisvine. It's going to show you her damage potential, how much damage she can deal in a short little window, and just give you guys an idea how strong she might be. And I didn't increase our crit rate here just so you guys can see, kind of that she doesn't really need to be all that consistent to make sure this guy's dead. See 20k on the final attack there. Yeah, she deals some pretty solid damage. And as I said, White Blind does basically do very similar damage. So you're going to be seeing those. The hardest challenge, as I said, is going to be making sure that your stats are all rounded out as nicely as they can be. Also wanted to go ahead and show her off in kind of a group setting here just to show you guys how much damage she can be doing to a group all simultaneously. So even though Noelle doesn't do huge 80k hits a lot of the time, the fact that she's hitting multiple opponents at the same time and dealing with all of them simultaneously is very good. And I also wanted to show that shield break there. You saw we did 40k there, and as I said, I've been able to get that up to 60k pretty easily. And I've even seen people get it to like 90k. So if you get some like crazy built Noelles, you definitely have some options. And with the brand new Claymore that's coming out, you're definitely going to have even more options. If you guys are going for that, that is going to be insane on Ito, I'm sure, but it's also going to be insane on Noelle. So if you somehow get unlucky and get the Claymore and not Ito, then slap it on Noelle, and I'm sure you'll be happily surprised. And yeah, I mean, this floor is pretty much over. I mean, we'll just go ahead and get rid of him there. We saw we pretty much handled the entirety of that floor, kept it at a high percentage here. What is that? 96% we kept it, and I wasn't even really paying attention. I was just hitting everybody with Noelle, so you can see how good she is at controlling a crowd. And I think floor 11 here was actually a really good way to show that off. All right, well, that is going to be it for the video. As I said, I love Noelle. She's a fantastic unit and a jack of all trades that is super fun to use. I love having her on the back burner in teams to just come out and deal really good damage and heal the whole team, as well as provide a shield. Is very sweet, and she's an awesome character that everybody has. And if you have some strong constellations for her, especially if you have her at C6, I can't recommend building her enough. Especially now that we've got this new set, it's made building her a lot easier, as she was pretty hungry for a lot of defense percent as well as crit rate and crit damage, and she still is, but some of that defense percent has been mitigated by the brand new set, as well as giving us some extra geo damage bonus, so she's dealing a little bit more damage, which is very, very nice, and I'm glad it's here, as it's made her a bit easier and more accessible while still keeping her very, very strong. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. How are you building your Noelle? Have I inspired you to build your Noelle at all, or are you just keeping all your resources for Ito and Goro? But other than that, I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. My name's Blossums, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.